Hi, I'm Corey Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me. We talk about faith and politics and all kinds of topics that really matter in our culture. So if you're tired of all the screamers out there taking all the oxygen out of the room and you want to join us in taking some of that space back, you'll love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, and I have a major favor to ask. We love bringing these conversations to you, but it does cost something to keep the lights on, so to speak. We'd love it if you could support our program through the Patron app on our website, which is politicsandreligion.us. That's politicsandreligion.us. Or you can support us through Patreon. And that's patreon.com/politicsandreligion. Again, that's patreon.com/politicsandreligion. And of course, subscribe, like, review, tell a friend, do all that stuff. We really, really appreciate it. So before I introduce our guest today, I wanted to say that we've prioritized having a diverse array of voices here on Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. And I'm very proud of the number of folks who've joined us so far. So many impressive, accomplished people of diverse backgrounds, diverse viewpoints, diverse in terms of heritage. But up until this point, folks who are non-religious, non-theistic in their thinking, or are atheists have been underrepresented, admittedly, on this program. But, we really do want to be inclusive and have these conversations with all kinds of good people with different views and beliefs than my own. For example, you might have listened to our talk with Dr. Rick Hansen just recently. It was really cool to learn about mindfulness, the intersection of Buddhism and psychology, as well as to put all that into a contemporary lens and talk about some politics in the discussion. I always love that. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, definitely I encourage you to go back and check it out. But today we've brought in a fellow who happens to be non-religious and I think considers himself an atheist, but we'll get into that. And I'm really looking forward to introducing him to you today. So without further ado, Kevin Bolling is the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance, an educational nonprofit and the only national organization dedicated to atheist, humanist, and other non-theist students. Kevin has served as the executive director of SSA since 2017 and has over 20 years of nonprofit leadership experience. His career has included over 10 years of student association management and on-campus program development from Los Angeles to Boston, as well as serving in leadership positions with the California Thoroughbred Horsemen Foundation and the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, which, by the way, if you haven't had a chance to check out Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, we saw they opened, it's got to be 2 or 3 years ago. They opened for, we saw ABBA at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yes.
And they did this, it was, you might be able to name the year if I say, it was a tribute to Elton John.
Yes. I was like, I'm not going to remember specifics about it.
It was awesome. It was so much fun. So anyway, Kevin, so great to have you on TPNR. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. And it's great to be here with you. And I think I love this forum that you have, because I think being able to talk about politics and religion, especially in today's climate, is really important. And to have really mindful, civil, thoughtful conversations where you're sharing views and learning from each other is really something that we need a lot more of.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I'm so glad you put it that way. That's, I think you really got to the ethos of what we're trying to do here. So yeah, I appreciate you giving us a hearing or just spending some time with us. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. I've heard you say that you had a quote unquote very Catholic upbringing. Can you describe like your family, the religious practice growing up?
Sure. And I'm sure there's lots of people that are much more Catholic than I have been. But yeah, my grandparents went to church like every day. And so they were, very religious, and both sets of grandparents, but on my mother's side, yeah, church every day for as long as I can remember. And my family growing up, my mother was involved heavily in the church leadership, Eucharistic minister, and on the councils. And she baked. Eucharistic bread at home that we take to church, and those sorts of things. So she was very involved just in religion, and especially in the church when I was growing up. And I was a altar boy for years and years and years. So grew up very strongly embedded in the church and very active in the church. And so it was, there's something that we sort of continually was a presence in our lives as I was growing up.
Yeah. So I know it's one thing to like participate in, this is what our family does, and you go to church here and there's the Christmas and the Easter things. Did you ever think about God and all that, or it was just more something that your family did?
There was definitely thoughts about God. Yes. And so I think my mother also at the time, sort of the flip side of that is that, the church doesn't have a great stance and is misogynistic when it comes to women and their role in the church and their value and their worth and those sorts of things. And so my mother she was never the quiet one. And so was, vocal with, well, why don't women have equal place in the church? And, why? And there was also a time when the altar boys were altar boys, and we actually had electrolytes. I was trying to think of the religious term, female electrolytes, and the church said, no, we can no longer have those. And so I, remember what sort of going through that, and my mother always being sort of very present and vocal. This doesn't make sense on why we have these two divisions of men are so important and women aren't within the Catholic Church. And so I think that was always sort of the permission to question and not to have to believe everything that the church said. And my mom, sort of also presented the lessons in the scriptures in church as those are stories, and we have to apply those to our everyday lives. So there wasn't that this was the word of God and, all being, without question. And part of it was to question, and how do we examine that? What points do we take to make our lives better and our lives better for other people? There's also a lot of negative stuff in the Bible. And that stuff you're like, okay, where did that come from? And we just put that aside.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Like a lot of folks that I go to church with, we know, and most of us can recite that the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Mind is a part of that, but we somehow seem to forget that this whole idea of questioning. And in my case, I grew up very observantly Jewish before I became a Christian. So the idea of grappling with scripture and grappling and wrestling with others who believe in this stuff, and you come across really problematic passages. Well, what do we do with that? And it's I think it's a worthy pursuit, and it's most like if everybody's just nodding their heads and preaching to the choir, so to speak, what good is it? I don't think we grow. I don't think we really deal with the stuff that we have to deal with. But here's the thing, and this goes to the point of what you were saying before, is when we do that, when we do earnestly wrestle, especially with some of the problematic pieces of scripture, we risk the possibility that we'll come out the other side shaking the foundations of what we believe. And we risk a lot there. Like when I became a Christian, I risked the possibility that I'd be completely ostracized and outcast by my family. And I'm sure a lot of folks go through something similar. If you grow up in a Catholic home, there are certain conclusions that you might arrive at that risk the possibility of you being ostracized and outcast. I mean, I'm guessing that being the head of the SSA, that you probably arrived at some of those conclusions at a certain point.
Yes, I did. And I think even for people of faith, though, I think oftentimes community of faith, and especially organized religion, doesn't want you to question. And so even where, like, don't think about it, don't be educated, don't read, you just have to have faith. So, we're not going to provide any explanation or try to give you any concrete message that explains stuff. You just have to believe it on its face value, and you can't question it. And, it seems like a very loose foundation to build, your belief system, your values, and those sorts of things on. Not that you can't. And but I think, if we, and not that there has to be a pursuit in question your religion to debunk it, but having those philosophical debates to strengthen your religion, to have a better understanding, to, as we progress in our world and our knowledge grows, shouldn't we then be thinking about things differently? I would argue yes. And having those philosophical debates or questioning that hopefully leads us in new directions, in whatever those outcomes may be.
Yeah. I have to admit that I've had those tendencies in myself. And when I've had those tendencies, the times that grieve me the most as I look back on them is in raising my kids. Now, at certain ages, it's better for the kids to have a little bit more black and white in certain things. Mm-hmm. But certainly once they started thinking for themselves, I think it's more important to nurture that, to nurture that inclination, to nurture their independent thinking, their fertile minds, and they're asking questions, rather than to indulge in these, I don't know, I can't think of the right word for it, but it's like the conquistador version of doing religion, like, the contemporary American version of, well, we are right about everything. So to the extent that you agree with us, you'll go to heaven. It doesn't seem to honor scripture, actually. I was just thinking about this today, actually. So a huge chunk of the Bible, as we understand a Hebrew Bible plus New Testament, are the prophets. Mm-hmm. The prophets were talking to the children of Israel, to the people of God. And they weren't going around to like Babylon or Persia and be like, hey, you got to agree with us and, vote this way or get this king. They were talking to the people of God and like, hey, y'all are worshiping a bunch of idols, or y'all are worshiping a golden trump. There's like all kinds of ways that the people of Israel were going off track. And the more often than not, the prophets were talking to them. I think I think we need a little bit more of that, rather than that sort of holier than thou posture that comes off. It's just too ripe to be hijacked by all the worst elements in our society, So I'm guessing that's a lot of what SSA is. You're sort of a safety net for folks, young people who see some of that and don't quite know how to work that out, or don't have a support system to say, this is all bullshit. I don't want any of that, but I still want some connect. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud right now, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about SSA?
But I think, and we work with students all over the country. And so our primary group that we work with are college university students, and a little bit of sort of what you were talking about, children, as children grow up, they go through a very dualistic stage, and in colleges, and when we start to expand, we start meeting new people. We understand that there's a lot more different perspectives and backgrounds and things that we just didn't grow up with, and we start to question that. And that's really when sort of critical thinking skills come in, and we sort of lose that dualism and start examining what we grew up with and how are we going to perceive that in life. So there is in student development theory, the traditional college years are a very powerful time and just in our human development, how we're framing ourselves and our interaction with the world and how we sort of grapple and put that all together. So that's a super important time. But we have students increasing more and more in high schools, and even middle school students reaching out, wanting to have a SSA or be a member of our organization. And primarily because they're looking for people who are like them and developing community and having friends who are like them, who think like them. And so it really comes down to that core sense of community and belonging that people yearn for. And I think that religion and religious communities often do very well. And to highlight a point you were going on a little bit earlier, it's religion sort of not matching up with scripture. I agree with what you were saying there. And even some of the U.S. church's own surveys and things on why young people are leaving religion talk about that dichotomy and the hypocrisy that we currently see between sort of the good parts of scripture and organized religion's behavior towards people, and how that doesn't match up, and people are going, well, if there's this dichotomy and this hypocrisy, I've got to examine this, and a large part of the result, an increasing part of the result, is young people are leaving organized religion faster and faster and faster nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know in my own formation, I was looking for coherence and consistency. I had even forming the questions was a huge part of the endeavor. Knowing how to articulate what questions were bothering me, what questions weighed heavy on me, and understanding how to articulate those was a huge part of my own project. And then in searching for coherence to that first set of questions, and inevitably you find a certain set of answers that open up a million more questions. So I was really curious actually about a little bit more about your own background. At what point did you start arriving at different conclusions about just the existence of God or religion in general?
Yeah, and I had the sort of slow roll out of religion. So yeah, and there are people, for some of the students we work with, have real, where religion has really done damage to them, and they've been hurt by religion. I'm fortunate I didn't have that sort of experience, and part of my sort of evolution out of religion, if you will, really happened in college. And it was a world history class. And I remember in the world history class, we're talking, there was, a real function, a part of the role of the Catholic Church in world history and in its impact. And as we sort of examine that, I realized that the majority of what the church was doing, in its impact with the world, was really about power and wealth. I mean, solely about power and wealth. And so that sort of led to this has nothing to do with the scriptures. This is anti what the scriptures are talking about. And so that sort of led me to start thinking about it. And I think my mother's question, it's okay to question and to, the teachings and apply those to your current life. And then I think for, a large chunk for me was coming out as being gay. And at that time, and still even today, the church is extremely negative, and actively campaigning against and telling me that I am not as full of a human being, and that my relationships and that, who I am as a person aren't as worthy, and that I'm a sinner. And again, from what I knew of religion, that just didn't match. And I was like, okay, this just isn't making sense any longer. And again, that hypocrisy of we're all God's children, except for you, because you're gay. So you're not. So part of it was a little bit of rejection, and part of it was this just doesn't match what I'm feeling and those sorts of things. And so I think that was a big part of, my leaving organized religion and realizing that I probably just don't believe that there is a God, and that's okay.
Yeah. Now, have you had conversations with family members who are still practicing Catholics or otherwise religious? And I'm curious how those have gone.
Yeah, I have some very, very religious family members. And the fact that I was really, me being gay and being sort of active in civil rights and those sorts of things, was enough for them where we really don't talk anymore.
That's too bad, actually.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. And I think it was easier for me to tell my sort of immediately family that I was gay than it was that I didn't believe in God, and that is really sort of identified as non-religious. And that I think really started in taking this position. There was sort of no more denying it. It was rather obvious, and so I think that was. But we've had great conversations. My family is religious. I respect their religion. I gives them value and purpose, and it is meaningful in their lives. So yay, that's fantastic. So yeah, and I've had my own, sort of path with religion and sort of and process of leaving, and that's fine as well.
Yeah, and I was also curious about, you've been, I don't know if this is the right word, but missional from a relatively early stage. I mean, you got a master's in higher ed. So it seems to me, just in looking at your background, that you started to get clarity on what your life's work would be fairly early on. How early on did you get clear on wanting to work with students? And was it part of your own evolution, if you will, that you started to get clear on that? Or how did that all come about?
I think in part it became from just me being very active in college. So I was on the campus activities board and was a resident assistant and did a little dabbling with the campus newspaper and just was very active on campus. So and I think through my own experience, saw the leadership development that came through. And so really enjoyed doing that and wanted to continue doing that. And working with students is fun. I mean, there's a level of energy and excitement that's just fantastic. I really enjoy the leadership development part, which is, I think, a lot of what we do with all of our students all across the country. How do you work with other people? How do you do programs? How do you impact your campus? How do you make your community better? What about community service? How is that impacting people? So those are all, I mean, sort of positive things. And I really work, I think, a little bit to your question, really look at the different things I've done professionally. It's been really important to me that what I do on a daily basis, I feel benefits other people. So I really enjoy that sense of going home each day and going, yep, my work helped better my community, helped better, in this instance, the world for young people. And so I enjoy that.
Okay, so this is where I'm super curious. At a certain point, you came to the conclusion that you don't believe in God, that the whole idea of God didn't make sense, and okay, don't believe in God. You also found great hypocrisies, important hypocrisies, specifically in the Catholic Church and other major religions, to the extent that I understand that you looked into other religions. But you have this pull to do good work for others in society. Is that because you then began to look into specifically secular or humanist values, philosophies? I'm curious both about secular humanist values, but I'm also curious about what it is in you or just another human being that rejects religion, but also has these pulls to do good work. Like, I'm curious about that whole thing.
Well, sure. And I think there's a fallacy, a myth, however you want to categorize it, of religion has the captive nature on values and morals. Because I think that, turn that question around. If you didn't have religion and religion wasn't helping you define your morals and values that you live your life, so you would go out and steal and kill and lie, and you would just start going out and doing all those things because you didn't have that religion wasn't saying that's how you should be doing it?
That's a totally fair question. And in fact, you might be talking to the wrong guy, because I'm very much at odds with what a lot of churches seem to be compelling folks to do, especially over these last 5-6 years. I mean, a lot of my brothers and sisters in church are not just explaining away, but embracing like anti-virtues, anti-morals, I mean, so we've talked a lot about it on this program, just basic, pare it down to its most basic. There's this expression, and even non-religious people have, appreciate the expression, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. I mean, these are pretty universal. Yeah, it's in the Bible, but it's pretty universal. A lot of us can agree that those are good virtues. I mean, Donald fucking Trump is the absolute opposite of all that, or however we might define love, whether it's we take how the Bible talks about what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. Or we have other definitions of love. We agree that love is a good thing, and however you define it, patient, kind, that's not Donald Trump. It does not envy, it does not boast, but Donald Trump does. So I'm at odds with the religious portion of it. But going back to something else, that said, I am religious, so I'm kind of a walking contradiction. But okay, let me explain that for a second, because I want to fight against the hijacking of religion, the hijacking of religious practices. A couple of weeks ago, I still practice certain Jewish rituals. Like every year, we still have a Seder, a Passover Seder, where we tell the story of the Passover. And I'm getting chills just thinking about it, because I know that's something that my father did with his father. My mother did with her family, my great grandparents, my great, like this is something that ties me into and allows me to be a part of a much longer story, that gives me a sense of meaning. And, strangely, I think you can do that without even necessarily believing in God, but you can believe in your family, you can believe in your heritage, you can believe in where you came from, and you can believe in being part of a story. Okay, so I do think there's value to rituals, and I really hate the fact, this isn't anything new to our day. I mean, historically, there's obviously been great atrocities done in the name of religion, done with guys, my own family, eviscerated in Germany in the middle part of this last century. My own grandmother had to leave everything they had in Ukraine, in Cherny Ostrovsky, Ukraine, at the hands of men wearing crosses on their chests. So I'm very, I see both sides of it, but I don't want to see that ground. I don't want to see religion or practices or rituals to just the evil that has come with guys who've hijacked all of that. So where does that leave us? I think it makes it that much more imperative for us. And I think I've heard you, sorry, I'm going on a long time about this, but I think I've heard you talk about, I might have even heard you say the word rituals. So there is a value to shared rituals, shared experiences, and tying into these greater stories. Now, the other thing I will say, and then I'll shut up and I'll let you respond to all this, fire hose stuff, is that I think it's the existence of God, the idea of God, that the very frame of reference for what is good is a God. But that's because I arrived at a different conclusion much earlier on, and that was that I believe in an open universe. I don't believe in a closed universe within which only things within the natural order can happen. But that, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, how I arrived at that basic conclusion that allowed me to arrive at another conclusion about the existence of God, and then the nature of God and what God is like. So I think that at the very least, I do think I also arrived at a related conclusion that there is something unique about human beings as creatures on this, or, I don't know how you would call it, like unique animals on this earth, if you will. And there are some things that I just don't find purely, I do believe in evolution, by the way, but purely evolutionary explanations for such things as the appreciation of beauty or joy, laughter, or appreciating music, which, by the way, I use those things to prove that Donald Trump is not human and doesn't have a soul, but that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, I've talked a lot. I'm sorry. I'm not the guest. You are. So there was a lot there, which is good. And I will say, for celebrating rituals and having traditions for human beings is extremely important, and whatever your community in. And Sasha Sagan, daughter of Carl Sagan, her, I think, most recent book talks all about rituals and traditions, and it's obviously from a very secular point of view. So yes, I mean, I completely agree with those are important, and we try to establish rituals with our student chapters and want them to celebrate things. And we just sponsored with a secular humanistic Jewish organization, we did a secular Passover or Seder that we did, as a webinar. So celebrating those sorts of things, Dia de los Muertos, which can be a very religious holiday, but there's also a larger population of Latino and Hispanic people who aren't religious, and so wanting to still celebrate those sorts of things and honor our relatives and do that, but it doesn't have to be with that sort of God perspective. And I think there are lots of questions in our universe of why did evolution happen, and how did we get created as people and as the solar system and the universe and those sorts of things. And I think the often statement from, if I have to generalize, is from non-religious people, is we may not know all of that, and that's okay. But making up that there's it's often men in the sky who are doing all this stuff to us and for us, and they know all what we're going to be
isn't always the sort of the best explanation to rest everything on and not look forward and how did this all happen. So that scientific exploration and critical thinking are important values that we should be moving forward on.
Okay, so then, and this is going to sound like a kindergartner's ignorant, or not kindergartners, but because kindergartners ask profound questions, just an ignorant question. So where do your values come from? Is it something, do you believe in the basic goodness of human beings? Or where do values come from?
Well, I think humanism or humanists believe that, if we want to build a more humane, just, compassionate, democratic society, that it's better to use pragmatic basis on that of human experience and critical thinking and reason and sort of reasonable knowledge to build those on as a better platform. Personally, do I believe that we, as humans, do we generally want to do good? I do. So, and I think, and part of that's our entire, our society is really what I think sets a lot of that, and how we interact as human beings and what messages are coming out. And you've sort of mentioned Trump several times. And there's also then the Trump effect. And if you
Trumpism,
the United States, and looking at how I think dialogue and our interactions with one another when we don't agree and sort of intolerance really rose during that times because it became more acceptable in our general society. And it's not something that I enjoyed. And I think there's lots of people who react to like, I didn't feel good in that, and I don't like where we went as a society. And that I think was from a very small of one person who has obviously a huge stage, being the president of the United States, but sort of injecting different values that became acceptable, and I don't think that was a good thing for us as a nation as a whole.
You bring up an interesting point. So you arrived at Secular Student Alliance in 2017. How familiar are you with the climate surrounding the organization prior to you working with them? I'm just curious about the Trump effect, like how SSA has been received.
So yes. So we've sort of seen our students on campuses, and our we have chapters, and there's autonomous student organizations on their individual schools or our campuses, and they've really sort of developed relationships. At Clarion University, our SSA chapter and Campus Crusade for Christ crew had a great relationship. And this is pre-pandemic. It's obviously things have changed a little bit, but they would each month they would go watch a movie together and have a conversation. So 1 week or 1 month, the members of crew would pick the movie, and the next month our students would pick the movie, and it flip-flopped back and forth. And it was a great experience that both of them have, and talking about things that they probably didn't expect to be talking about, but always with that sort of open, like, we're here for dialogue and we want to learn from each other from different perspectives. And that's a good thing. We started that same chapter. There was a more conservative religious group that actually went to the student government and filed an official protest against our students, saying that they were coming harassing the Christian students. And our students were dumbfounded. It's like, what? And our students had pictures where, they would put up posters, and the other students, the group that was complaining, would go and write stuff on them or rip them down, and they would do chalking on campus, like upcoming meetings and events. And there's the conservative religious group would write rather negative things alongside of it, and was harassing students and following our students and just, doing those sorts of things. Crew actually came to testify in support of our students and going, no, there's SSA, the SSA group isn't the one doing that. It's the conservative, religious students. They're good guys. We know them. We like the SSA students. They would not do that. So that's some of the things that we've sort of seen personally. We also know of incidents where religious students have gone into LGBT groups meetings and some of our meetings, and have gone in when they're publicized on campus, have gone in and disrupted the meeting so it couldn't happen. And in some instances, and there's national stories, and it's easy to Google, where campus police have had a big call to escort those students out, the religious students out, so that LGBT groups could continue to have their meetings and meet in peace.
Have you had religious students want to be a part of SSA, not to troll, but to be kind of joined in common cause? Like, hey, it is a secular pluralist society. I'm religious, but I want to be a part of this thing.
We do have students who are religious students who believe in supporting our secular society, supporting the separation of church and state, and also, and I think a large part of the form that you have here is they want to have philosophical conversations about religion, and oftentimes their religion and other religions, but oftentimes their religion, but their religious community isn't a safe place to have those conversations. And so our students tend to be very knowledgeable about religion and religion in general, and love to have a conversation about religion. And so we have religious students who are members, and our students in most cases often embrace that. And if we have students who have been hurt by religious communities, they come with a weary, they're a little leery sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think if religious students are coming in good faith to have conversation and wanting to, have, our students are more than welcome to have those conversations, and in most instances, welcome those religious students to be involved.
Now, I know that it's not just college campuses, and I do want to talk about that outreach you guys did, because it was pretty expansive all over the country. But since we're talking about it, you also have chapters in high schools and junior high schools as well. I think you said. I'm curious, in those instances, when you have students that come from religious families, have you had negative encounters from parents of those students?
Oftentimes for our chapters in middle schools and high schools, there oftentimes is a supportive parents and supportive teachers and faculty, obviously on in those schools, and so that's almost imperative that there's some level of support that can happen. We have had instances where administration doesn't want a non-religious group to start, even though they have religious groups, as student organizations. And we have the Freedom from Religion Foundation has a great group of lawyers who are very helpful if that becomes a problem, and writing a letter, and 99% of the time that solves that problem. Going, you have a fair accommodations. You have to, public accommodations. You have to let them have their group. Our college students, though, about 80% of our members in college and higher ed come from religious families. So while their journey is now non-religion, they come from religious families. And so we've had a student we have Ask an Atheist Day, so twice a year, and it's having a table on campus and going, hey, we're atheists, ask us anything. Yeah. So, and it can be, it's very philosophical, how do you get your morals, and how do you explain the start of the universe? Or it's like, what football team are you rooting for? What'd you have for breakfast? What's your favorite band?
Yeah.
So it's lots of different things, but it's helped normalizing non-religion. And with almost 50% of youth in the United States now being non-religious, it's still important to do.
Yeah. I know you're a big Ryan Burge, you're following his stuff. Me too. We had him on the program a few months ago. Just great, really enlightening stuff. So
yeah. I would say we had one student who did one post for Ask an Atheist Day. Not even, I'm an atheist, ask me anything. Just did one supportive post of that on his social media, and his family called him up and was like, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, I'm not religious. I don't believe in God." He had to get a job. They stopped paying for his fortunately that tuition had already been paid for, but stopped paying for his rent. They were helping with rent assistance. They tried to take his car even though he paid for it. So he had to get a second job. He's like, I'm not quitting college. I'm finishing college. So got the job, and then lost all the support and community from his family just because of that one post.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You're bringing up a lot of things. My oldest, I have 3 kids. My oldest, who's 21 now, we had this conversation the other day, and Savannah described what she called as religious trauma. Going to a Christian school for much of their life, up until just before middle of junior high school, and Savannah has a number of friends who, in particular, the other kids that they identify with that I had different gender identity or were beginning to question their identity, whether it's bi or trans or gay or, I'm still learning about pansexual. Like there's still a lot of stuff that I'm completely unfamiliar with, but especially those kids, they were put through such trauma at the hands of that school. I would imagine that, I don't know, that's a whole other conversation. I should probably have Savannah back on with some of those students, especially now that they're in their early 20s and how they're working through some of that stuff. And some of them still identify as Christian, so for those who identify as Christians, I wonder what prescriptions they can offer to that school and say, hey, you can do this better. You don't have to necessarily, like, if you just at the very least accept me, you don't even have to affirm me, but at least accept me. It doesn't mean I'm not going to leak my gay on you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we just had this really, Savannah, she educates me daily. So I'm very grateful to have, they, see, I'm like, it's a new language that I'm trying to learn. Anyway, so tell me about this huge outreach. It was like over 1 million students that you reached. Was it college campuses in every state, or tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We started by coming out of COVID. And I mentioned that, about 80% of our students come from religious families. So in March of 2020, when campuses just closed and students went home all of a sudden, religious students went home to their religious families and their religious communities and had support and community and we're fine. For many of our students who now are, identifying as non-religious and their family may not be aware of that, they went home to religious families and religious communities and lost their friends and support networks and the things they were doing on campus. So we changed everything that we're doing to really meet the needs and be there digitally, virtually for our students. So they still had those connections. Coming out of the pandemic, we really looked at we really want to make sure we're reaching out to students so that they know, they're coming back on campus and they know that we're here. So we identified the largest 5 public institutions in every state. And reached out saying, hey, we'd like the students' email addresses and their contact information so that we can reach out to them. And we're fair in saying, hey, the growing number of non-religious students, most colleges don't provide any resources for their moral and value development or their being a holistic person. And so we, by being involved, they help reduce or increase graduation rates, reduce dissatisfaction. There's lots of things that being involved in any community on a campus helps the students with the educational experience and betters their educational experience. So yes, we did direct outreach to 1.4 million students. So most of that was by email. Some we had telephone numbers, so we sent them texts. Some we had mailing addresses, and so we mailed them information. And we knew that about half the students we'd be reaching were religious students, and about half would be non-religious, however they defined it. And so our really message was a lot of it was Ryan's information about his article about 47% of students are identifying as non-religious. And so it was really sort of the normalization of that, and it's okay to be non-religious. And then obviously some information about us, our scholarships, our conference, and those sort of leadership development things that we do. And we received some very nice emails back from religious students, some very interesting ones. And on the flip side, also with some atheist students, we received, most of it was obviously sort of very grateful in knowing that there were other people out there like them, and there were lots of students on campus like them. We had, that often odd one as well.
Yeah. It's interesting, the way that you just described higher graduation rates and data points that indicate their success and health. There's a subtle difference between the way I've heard, like the school my kids went to for the better part of a decade, they would talk about it in a subtly different way. They would say, because we are right, because we know we have the answers, Therefore, our kids are going to be better looking. Our kids are going to be smarter. They're going to be the captain of all the sports teams. And because we're right, and then when it turned out that a lot of the kids had trouble and they were just normal kids, and, a lot of that just breaks down. But what I think what you're saying is, no, they have higher rates of success on a number of measurable levels because they have connection, because they have support, not because we're right and we have all the answers. If anything, it's a more open inquiry of a lot of these philosophical questions. So it's just an observation, but I was curious, since I'm talking about it, have you had students from Christian schools reach out to you?
Before the pandemic, the number of students starting chapters at religiously affiliated or religiously connected schools was actually on a dramatic increase. Baylor University, Waco, Texas, large private Baptist school, actually has had our longest running chapter, and Baylor would not recognize them as an official organization, so they couldn't book meeting space, they couldn't have events on campus, and they got very creative and would work with other student groups to have events or a professor having a discussion and those sorts of things. But they were, during the pandemic, they closed. They're in the process. We think we have some students who are going to restart that chapter now as they're being back on campus. But that was an active place for them to be involved. Baylor also didn't allow the Muslim students to form, the Hindu students didn't allow the LGBT students. So they actually all got together and went to the student activities office and the student government office, say, we want to be recognized. We want to have the same benefits as we're paying student fees, we're paying tuition, we want to have the same benefits as everyone else. And the student government and the student activities office seemed supportive. And it came down to, we don't think our alumni and donors will like this at all. And so no. So it's about money and power.
Yeah.
Not about doing good or doing what we know is right for the students on the campus who were supposed to be educated. And many of our students, while the university knew about the chapter, it was sort of a little bit of a don't ask, don't tell. So be quiet, don't create too much trouble, we won't bother you. But many of our students who went to Baylor were on scholarships, and many of them were in the honors college and on scholarships. So they didn't want to jeopardize that as well. So they valued their experience. They wanted to have this community and understood this is where their values came from, but also recognized that they were in financial peril if they did too much.
It's interesting how a lot of these arguments come down to some version of territorialism, whether it's financial territorialism, intellectual territorialism, geographic, obviously territorialism, but that's what this whole project is all about. Not my project or podcast, but American democracy or just civil society. Like, how do we figure out how to live together? So, okay. I had a question. We were talking a little bit about this before. One of the things that makes sense to me about scripture is that it's a couple thousand years old. Some of the letters and books in there are older than that. And I think that there is value in literature that has lasted that long. What you might, and obviously, I think we agree to different degrees that it should be looked upon critically. Who wrote this? To what audience did they write it? What were the restrictions upon participation in even reading this, let alone interpreting this throughout history? So I think a critical eye is a healthy one, even with quote unquote holy scripture. But are there transcendent documents? Is there transcendent literature, any sort of transcendent material that a humanist or non-religious person, an atheist, might be able to defer to and say, as opposed, because I don't know, it just, if we're only relying on our own intuition, if that's all, we have to rely on that to a degree, but that's only our own experience, as opposed to deferring to oh, wow, this Berkeley guy or this Descartes guy or this, whoever it might be, has some really sound stuff that I'm deferring to. Is there transcendent literature, I guess, is the short question.
There is literature of non-religious people it's not obviously not as popular in those things on society and values and philosophy and examining the world. But I think, and I think I'm answering your question, but I would say that the Earth and our scientific exploration and understanding of it, and that it's billions of years old rather than 6,000, is a much better example and truer knowledge of what transpired than when you go to the Museum of the Ark in Kentucky, and you see dinosaurs and people living together, and the world was created in 7 days and it's 6,000 years old, and all of those things that make no sense and vehemently justified with so yeah, I mean I think there's such a rich body of evidence that we have that tells us so much of how the planet came into existence, even though we can't answer all that, how we came into existence, how diverse our world is, how our brain in the layers of it from its core to the different layers that have given us a different level of intelligence and a different level of consciousness, how much of a difference those things have made. I think that enriches our world much more than some religious books. And I would argue, the Catholic Bible has been rewritten how many times? Like, what edition are we on? And it was monks in monasteries rewriting things and changing words and doing all of those things. So the word that was originally started is nowhere near what it is today. I mean, homosexuality, the word homosexual appears in Bibles when that didn't come into existence until the 1950s, 60s, in there. So how was that in Jesus's time? And in Jesus's time, the Romans, same-sex unions were not taboo in those times. We know that. There's pictures on buildings that show like it's a phallus pointing this way if you want this. Like, it was fairly popular in society, or it was fairly accepted in society as being part of the society. So that wasn't from Jesus's time.
Yeah. So a lot there. I wonder. You're not going to get an argument from me about like 6,007 literal 24-hour days. Like, I have to have those fights internally in the church. So I'm not the best person to make that argument about 6 literal 24. I just think that's, even just look, I believe in the importance, if not I believe in the authority of Scripture, but when you read Genesis 1 and 2, that is just not the point of those chapters. It was more about the separation of days and ordering time and, establishing a people. I don't know. That's a whole different thing. As far as the authority of Scripture and the literature itself, I think I probably do have some discrepancies with how you're describing it. But I just don't think, I don't know if that's a worthy endeavor. There are other people who've had that conversation. Yeah. I find some of the literature persuasive, some of it not. Guys like Josh McDowell, Lee Strobel would make an argument that there is, if you look at the stuff as literature and judge it through the same lens as other literature of antiquity, there's pretty good foundation for the authenticity of it, if not the authority of it. And I've found that persuasive enough, but I get your point about different translations. Like, homosexuality is an interesting point because I'm in Romans right now. And in chapter 1, there's a reference to homosexuality. I'm like, now, wait a second. What Paul was referring to was practices of rape, practices of putting people in how do we call it today? Consensual, non-consensual at different levels, where it was to the point of violence. That's the sexuality he was referring to. But so many translations now, that particular verse is translated, and I'm like, how? So I have some of the same questions you do about particular pieces of Scripture that we now take, as we just now take it on the face value of the translations that we have.
And I think a little bit that comes down, and you sort of made this point a little earlier, was religion and the church have been politicized. So, and if you know, SCOTUS's just sort of decision coming out, in the 60s when conservative religious people realized that they could make abortion an issue, to politicize it to help change how they wanted to things. We've seen those, and I'm not trying to get into a discussion about abortion, but there have been multiple points, and even recently, where religion has been used to politicize things and sort of take it over outside of its context of really the scriptures and the good messages that were out there. And you sort of spoke to that earlier.
Yeah, no, it certainly works. There was some good history work. I forgot who it was I was speaking to, but the abortion as an issue came into prominence in the late 70s. And guys, the guys who were doing it knew exactly what they were doing. It was guys that were anti-segregationist, segregation. They were trying to perpetuate segregation is what they were doing, but they were trying to find these other sort of hooks to perpetuate their cause. It's an interesting, I'm speaking a little bit out of turn because to bring something as controversial as that up, I'd want to give it more time. But I take your point that, again, it's just been hijacked to justify the most unjustifiable types of behavior and ungodly causes. So I do take your point. I did want to ask you, I've heard you refer to, this is a little bit of a troublemaker kind of a question.
Go for it.
So I've heard you refer to being woke and cancel culture almost dismissively. Did I misinterpret how you were talking about it?
Probably not. Obviously, it's a bit of our society, but it's, I think, a lot of politics. And I think it's probably a little off topic, but I think the Republican Party is really good at messaging. I know that, not that it's always, I think, the smartest or I would agree with or correct, but really good at marketing. And Democrats are so horrible at it. So, so when we get, woke and cancel culture, great marketing. When I look at, cancel culture stuff and oftentimes it's used on college campuses, do we really see, at any small instance is blown up? And Fox News does an excellent job of it. I give them credit for how well they do to their point of blowing it up, of something small that happens and turning into something huge and making it sound like it's happening everywhere, where the evidence shows that it's really not. And I often think with cancel culture, it's there are some in our society that like to be able to say what they want, to do what they want, and never to be held accountable. And I see in our capitalist society, if you believe that I make my decisions on what I buy and those sorts of things, part of that is how I see the company. So if I don't agree with what the company's doing, part of my capitalistic values is not to purchase their product. So that's been turned into cancel culture. Or if I don't like what a person, if I don't like that a person is going around saying that trans people should be killed and shouldn't have any rights, why should I support that person? So, and I don't need to hear that person. So yes, and I think it's interesting that religious people conservative religious people are often the ones who are claiming cancel culture. But if you look at the Teletubby, if you look at Walt Disney World right now with DeSantis, I mean, if that's not the biggest thing of instance of I don't like what you said, so I'm going to ignore your freedom of speech. I'm going to ignore that I'm the governor and supposed to be dealing with all, everybody. And I'm going to pull your thing. If that's not the biggest hypocritical action of so many values that DeSantis says he believes in, and example of cancel culture it is owned, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's confusing to say the least for someone who, literally in a 24-hour period, a lot of my friends who are very like Fox News conservative, I don't think that's actually like Burkean, Buckleyan or Thomas Sowellian type conservatism. I think it's appalling for folks who really philosophical conservatism. But within a 24-hour period, the Fox News version of conservatives are celebrating Elon Musk buying Twitter because of freedom of speech, and everybody's going to have freedom of speech. there's questions about that, like freedom of speech. So spreading lies and falsehoods and advocating for hateful violence, I don't think that's necessarily included in the ethos of freedom of speech. But within a 24-hour period, they're celebrating Ron DeSantis, who's literally using the government or the Republican-led Florida state legislature to act out against and take great pains to punish an entity who is, by their freedom of speech, express support for their LGBTQ employees. So out of that, to me, it's a pure freedom of speech thing. Whatever you think about the Don't Say Gay bill, which I know it's not really called that officially, but I mean, that was another piece of, it's just like, it's trolling. And basically what that does is it gets certain amount of clicks and views, and, it helps him raise some money. I'm sure, he raised a ton of money just based on passing that legislation. But what the hell does it do? Like, so teachers can't talk about, first of all, it's like critical race theory. It's like there was no high school curriculum that had critical race theory anywhere in its subjects, but now everybody's an expert on it, and you can't talk about critical race theory. Let's pretend there was no slavery, because it'll make Johnny, who goes to whatever church, feel bad about himself. Like, I don't know, it's crazy. You got me started. So
no, and I think, what does it do? And so for young gay kids who hear this message and who are trying to figure this out for themselves, or even who are in non-supportive environments and who don't want to be gay because of the negative messages that they've had growing up, this is what increases suicide rates, and this is what increases depression. And I mean, there are so many negative things that happen by the Don't Say Gay, by not just, even if it was never passed, even just bringing it up, that the message that so many young people are getting is horrible. And what that does to their self-confidence, what that does to their how they value themselves, how they see their place in our society, is so detrimental. That alone is the reason not to have those conversations, because we know we are, by doing that, we are hurting people by doing that. And just to me, that makes no sense in doing those sorts of things.
So I'll tell you, again, by way of confession, an epiphany that I had in 2004. This is a long time ago. And I was still pretty new Christian. I had only arrived at some of those conclusions 3 or 4 years prior. But 2004 in California, Prop 8 was on the ballot, and that was to make gay marriage illegal. So I talked with friends from church. I talked with friends who were gay. I was trying to think this thing through, and I finally arrived at this epiphany that, so the inclination or this unspoken belief from some of my friends from church was, well, it's the right thing to do because and I'm like, first of all, I don't necessarily agree on the theological merits of that argument. But also, we're evangelical, and, this is what we believe, and this is what we want our society to look like. It should reflect our values. But here I am thinking, okay, so let's say we get this law passed. None of my gay friends are going to wake up the next day and say, this is illegal. Being gay must be wrong. So I better repent of that quote unquote sin. And I'm going to become a Christian because that's the right, that is completely illogical. In fact, I think it's counter to the greater, not just evangelism. It does harm to I think there's a greater principle. Jewish people articulate it better in a principle called tikkun olam. Whether people are Jewish or not, and I believe whether people are Christian or not, tikkun olam means healing the world. We can all participate in identifying disease in the world, or problems in the world, or problems that other people are having, and try to bring healing to that, try to bring redemption to that. So whether it's a religious endeavor or not, we can participate in that. But this inclination that we're going to pass some stupid law that two people who have nothing to do with Christianity, and certainly will want to have nothing to do with it from here on out, it's not going to do that greater project of redeeming the world, redeeming all the problems in the world. So sorry, I've talked a lot more on this conversation than I probably should have. So I hesitate to ask if you have any other questions for me.
I do. So All Saints Church in Pasadena, very Episcopal, very social justice oriented. And Desmond Tutu has been there to speak many times. And he introduced me to the principle of Ubuntu. So Swahili, I'm pretty sure, but I am because you are. And so, and sort of a little bit of the value thing. Yeah, because you have worth, I have worth. Because you're okay, I'm okay. When you're doing well, I'm doing well. And that's just there's not a religious aspect to that. It's a cultural sort of thing. And it's I think a beautiful thing for us to move forward with in life. And, those sort of, humane, just, compassionate society that we want. And, that's sort of humanistic values. Those are the things I think that are better for us to focus on and do those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, and I can see the evolutionary ethics in some of that thinking. Like I can see where someone who is an evolutionary ethicist, I don't know if that's such a thing, but I could see where that study would make sense. I was talking to this fellow Rick Hansen, psychologist by trade, but also Buddhist practitioner, meditation expert, and has studied the brain science of the benefits of meditation. Just something as simple as participating in breathing means that we're participating in good. Like if I'm outside, I'm getting the oxygen from my plants and I'm delivering is it carbon dioxide? Is that what
carbon dioxide? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this exchange that we're making each other better. We're helping each other sustain ourselves. And, that's sort of a rudimentary explanation of it. But I think there are higher callings that we can do other versions of that, Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I was sort of a question for you.
Yeah.
And I think as part of our philosophy as an organization is the freedom of and from religion, sort of as one of the grounding roots in the foundation of the United States. And I will say while we obviously serve non-religious students as our main focus, and we've had conversation about religious students as well, and they're welcome and those sorts of things. We also, part of that is if there was, a Muslim student who's having an issue about being a minority religion being discriminated, we would support that student. Hindu students, Buddhist students, non-religious students, Christian student who wasn't feeling that they, were being discriminated against. We would support that student because it's part of your freedom to have your religion. And I think we also, though, that's your personal experience. And where your freedom ends is when you try to then have me live your religious beliefs. So you can have yours, and that's fine for you. Your freedom ends when you start to force me to live by your religious belief. And I think we've definitely seen the increase in Christian nationalism just in the United States. And I'm curious, as a religious person, how do you see that taking place, and something to be worried about, something that we need to be done about, those sorts of things?
Yeah, no, I think there is something that we need to be worried about. I think especially, the impulse that I've found in religious communities I've been a part of, whether it's my kids' school a few years ago or the church that we went to when I first became a Christian for the better part of 10, 15 years, Bible studies, just all different. I should preface this by saying we go to a wonderful church in Pasadena right now. It's a Presbyterian church. I've learned things from that church community that I think any number of progressives, non-religious people would say, wow, that's really admirable. I've learned the concept of affirming, not just approving, but affirming when it comes to folks' sexual identity. So I do want to preface it by saying that, but I am here to tell you, man, like there is a problem in the church. And I think it's imperative that the leaders within the church are the Isaiahs and the Jeremiahs and the Malachis. We're not doing enough of that. And when it happens, you see what happens to Beth Moore. You see what happens to Dr. Russell Moore. You see what happens to people that I really look up to and admire, people like David French, who frankly was on the leading. He was a leader within the pro-life movement. He was a leader within the conservative legal movement. But because he's finding common cause with folks who he understands that we live in a pluralist society. He understands that these stupid state level laws that are getting passed about anti-CRT and anti-gay and anti-trans, he understands that there are certain morals and values that do transcend. There are certain morals and values that in a pluralist society we can all agree upon. But the second that it becomes one religion dictating that, and it becomes particular to one religion, I'm curious to see how this case advances with the coach in Texas wanting to pray on the 50-yard line. There's subtleties in there. There's nuances in there that it creates an inhospitable environment for folks who choose not to participate. So right. I'm curious to see how we work that out. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to sit here and say, no, the church has got it all right and the Christians are, free from sin. But I think folks who are identifying as Christians, folks who are identifying as evangelicals are some of the worst examples. When what comes to mind when we think of evangelicals, when what comes to mind when we think of Christians is some guy taking a shit in the middle of a rotunda in the Capitol. What comes to mind are people who are taking flags and beating the life literally out of police officers. Yeah. I think we got a serious problem, but the problem is only going to get worse if it's folks who are outside of the church, because then it just, I don't know, it gives fuel to this illusion of grievance of we're the persecuted minority, which I think is an illusion and it's bullshit. And it's led to all kinds of evil. I think it has to come from within the church, but I don't know. I've tried to do it because that's kind of my nature as a Jew, where, if you're not, if you don't have three opinions about any given issue, you're just not, you have to hand in your Jewish card. So I've done this, but to be honest, and it wasn't just in the era of Trump. It's been since I become a Christian. I saw certain things that just didn't make sense. And I've literally, I was sharing this story with somebody the other day. We were on a weekend retreat with some folks that we were doing a Bible study class with. And 4 or 5 of the guys stayed up late at night. We were going through some scripture. And it was a part of Acts where basically it was like they were setting up the picture of a socialist society. Everybody had to sell all of their belongings, all of their property, take all of the funds from that and give it to the church so that the church can dispense, or not the church, but the group of people who believed in Jesus rose from the dead thing, that they can disperse it as a group of people. I mean, that's a picture of socialism. So I brought this thing up. And I was like, it was so socialist that somebody sold all their stuff and kept some of it back. They gave most of it to the church, but they kept some of it back. And that guy died on the spot. Man, that was socialist to the end, that on steroids. Literally the next morning, we had another day or two that we were supposed to be there. They asked us to leave. They're like, yeah, you can't be.
Oh, wow.
So I've been shouted down in auditoriums that there was so these tendencies, have been around for a long time. So at the kids' school, they brought in this speaker who grew up in Eastern Europe, and I thought we were going to learn about what's going on in Eastern Europe and how those governments and cultures have evolved. But no, this speaker spoke for an hour about the fact that Barack Hussein Obama, she made sure to say his middle name every damn time, is this Marxist terrorist. He's probably an Islamist. I'm like, you can't be all those things at the same time, first of all. But I got up at the end of the thing and I said, all due respect, what does this have to do with classical Christian education? I mean, let her have a 7-minute segment on Fox News or OANN or something like that. But what does this have to do with classical Christian education? Man, I was shouted down from the back of the room. Somebody had to basically take the head of the school had to basically call to order the whole thing, because there were people getting it was more than hostile out in the parking lot. My dad was with me that night. There were people who were honking their horns, and it was on the border of violence. So anyway, all that to say, I'd love to sit here and say we got it all right. No, we're really a peaceful people, but there's this other subculture in American Christianity today where we're worshiping idols of a different sort. And that idol is a certain version of conservatism. Because like if you come in with scripture and you're like, hey, wait a second, Leviticus 19 says this thing about immigration. I think we should maybe rethink these conversations we're having about immigrants, folks who are born on another side of, the American Mexican border. Like maybe we should rethink it in light of what scriptures actually. No. You can't do that, because a higher priority is being an Orthodox devotee of whatever the hell Hannity's saying that night, or whatever the hell Bongino's saying that day. So I don't know, man. I wish it makes my theological underpinnings. It makes it really. It's troublesome for those theological underpinnings that I've arrived at. So I'm just being as transparent as I can be.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I agree. And I think a large part of why young people are leaving religion is because of, I think, exactly what you're saying. So they know gay and trans people, but yet religion tells them how horrible they are, and you can't say, well, I'm religious, but I like them, because there's not an appetite for that. Or we should be more compassionate to people trying to get in the United States, because my family immigrated to the United States, and my neighbor's family immigrated to the United States, and a lot of people in my school, their families immigrated to the United States, but for some reason they're bad people now. Yeah. So there's a lot, as our world becomes so much smaller, a largely part to technology, and just how pluralistic we're becoming. I think this version of religion is will come to an end, actually very, not soon, but will have its underpinnings in the long run. And I'm very hopeful about the young generation coming up.
Yeah. And I do want to say again, like, for as much of a critique as I have against some of the really, really troublesome things, to say the least, that we just discussed, there are organizations, there are churches that are doing the right things. I was going to the annual gathering of the Society for Christian Ethics, and they specifically get together at the same time in the same place with Society for Jewish Ethics, Society for the Study of Muslim Ethics. So I think there are, and some of the panels I heard there are just fantastic. Just, I think even a non-religious person would go to some of these talks and panels and applaud what they're all about. But, Society for Christian Ethics does not get nearly as many clicks as Laura Ingram's show. So.
No, and I think we would both agree there are lots of good religious and non-religious people out there.
Yeah.
And there are lots of bad, there are bad organized things that are, perverting, taking over for other intents and purposes.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, Bonhoeffer was the guy who literally was put to death because he bucked not just Nazism, but the institutional part of the Church of Germany. He was the exception. So, yeah, I think that's a tendency that historically has repeated itself. So I've monopolized your time for a little bit longer than I anticipated, but it's been a great conversation. I'd love for you to tell us how we can find more information about you, Secular Student Alliance, and you guys are having a summer conference. That's a really cool event that I heard about. To just tell us a little bit more about how we can find you and all the great work y'all are doing.
Sure. So the easiest place is online, secularstudents.org. So if students want to find chapters that may be at their school, we've got a map on there. We have free student membership. So we're fortunate our donors and supporters allow us to provide all of our services free to our students. So we do lots of tabling supplies and resources for our student chapters. And we right now, on our sites for secular activism, so separation of church and state. You can be religious and support separation of church and state. We hope that a lot of religious people support that. But we have our scholarships that are going right now, so it's easy to go in and apply for our scholarships. Link on our website for that as well. If you're a donor, you'd like to support us, please feel free to do that. And we do have our summer conference. We've been having. I think we're 22. This will be our 22nd conference. The last two have been virtual. We had plans to go back in person. We were going to be in Missouri. And unfortunately, we just had to make the decision to go virtual again this year. So it was not our desire, but we are. And so we'll actually be having information up about end of July. We're going to have 3 days. And it's going to be really sort of student nuts and bolts focused. So sort of coming out of pandemic, sort of organizing and action and really sort of formulating that for the best start coming back on campus in the fall. So we'll have information very soon about that. But there is a link. If students are interested, they can click on the link saying, hey, send me more information when you got it. And we'll be doing that.
So I just realized I do have one more question.
Sure.
And again, it might sound like a troublemaker question. So you, between like Ask an Atheist Anything, summer conference, the outreach that you did to, campuses all over the country, do you see the job of SSA partly as one of persuasion?
I don't think so.
I was going to ask if you're an evangelical atheist.
No. There is the aspect of part of and an intent on our part of helping normalize non-religion. And I think the main root of that comes from is we don't want young people, we don't want people in general, but we especially don't want young people feeling like less valued and harassed and attacked. And there have been instances of violence and those things. We don't want that to happen. And just because you don't believe in the man in the sky who's telling you what to do, and I know that's a way generalization, simplification, but that you're still a good person. And there are the angry atheist and baby eaters, and I think we're away from most of that, but there's still, trans, Muslim, and non-religious people are still the most mistrusted, despised people in the United States per surveys. So there's a lot of stigma that we're fighting against. And so helping normalize that, we're hoping that not that you become non-religious, but that you go, okay, there are religious people out there and there's nothing wrong with that. Right.
That makes sense. I'm glad I asked. It's more a matter of support. And as you say, normalizing so that there isn't this hostile environment for folks who don't happen to believe in God or don't happen to submit to a religious practice as something that they want to participate in.
Yeah. And I will say, I think lots of organized religion right now does a much better job of turning young people into atheists than we could do ourselves.
I think that's a great point. That's a really great point. And we could talk for another hour just about that, my own kids' experiences. Anyway, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate getting to know you personally a little bit better and learning about SSA and all the great work you guys are doing. It's been a real pleasure. It's been enlightening for me. So I really appreciate it.
I thank you for having me on. It's been a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
You bet. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review and comments wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend about Talk Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. We're easier to recommend than ever. politicsandreligion.us. That's politicsandreligion.us. You can even support a program through the Patreon app on the site or patreon.com/politicsandreligion. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week. Thank you for joining us today. If you dig what we're doing here, it is super easy to follow us. You can go to our site, politicsandreligion.us. That's with the "and" spelled out, A-N-D. politicsandreligion.us. And we're on all the socials at TP and R Pod. TP and R Pod for Talking Politics and Religion Pod. And here's a big way you can support us: by becoming one of our patrons. You can even become a producer or executive producer of our program and have a lot more say in who we bring on, the kinds of questions we explore, or just help us keep the lights on. But mostly, we really appreciate you giving us a listen. So for the whole team here at Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.